Hello, everyone. Welcome to Communicating with Color Workflows for Onset and Post Colorists. Welcome to another episode of CS Presents. It's a series of inspirational and educational webinars from creative professionals around the world. We actually have someone joining us from France today. Don't forget to ask questions as we go, and we'll answer as many of them as we can in the next hour or so. Thank you to Creative Solutions, made up of Teradek, Small HD, and Wooden Camera, as well as Sigma Cine for their support of this stream. Don't forget to follow all of their various social channels. If you're joining us on YouTube, please make sure to click subscribe on Teradek's channel for more content exactly like this. My name is Graham Mailer Sheldon. I am a Local 600 Director of Photography, also a member of the Producers Guild of America. Today, we're talking color and HDR. As cinematographers, we only have a couple of ways to tell a story, right? Focus, composition, lighting, lens choice, camera choice, and of course, color. There's so many misconceptions floating around about color. We actually all joined just a little bit ago and we've been talking about it, and many misconceptions abound. What practices on set need to be done in order to make sure the intentions captured on set are communicated to post from the color perspective? And what are folks in the post-production color process looking for when they receive footage? How can you make sure the DP and director's vision is carried through post? And of course, how does HDR factor into all of this? So we have an all-star group of expert color panelists here today to help us with this discussion. Here they are in no particular order, starting with Tanner. Tanner Bushman is a senior colorist at MTI Film. Tanner has been a passionate colorist at MTI Film for several years. His color work on The Affair, The Politician, Kidding, The Story of God, and Through the Wormhole, among other TV and feature projects, has greatly diversified his portfolio and helped to refine his eye for the trade. Looks like we're working out some bandwidth issues here with Tanner, but we'll get him back in just a moment. The color in The Politician, for one, is just absolutely spectacular. We're also joined by Stephen Porter. Say hello, Stephen.
Hello.
He is a supervising colorist also at MTI Film. Stephen Porter has been a well-respected colorist at Encore Hollywood and Riot Santa Monica since 1989. He supervises and trains the dailies team at MTI Film, setting a high bar of artistry. Stephen has received numerous industry accolades, including those for Showtime's Emmy Award-winning Weeds and HBO's Emmy-nominated The Pacific, which was honored with the Hollywood Post Alliance Award for Outstanding Color Grading. So, Michael, I don't know, do we have some stills of The Pacific and The Politician we can throw up real quick? And if not, that's fine too. There we go. Yeah, so this is some of Tanner's work, just some stills from The Politician, and then I think we have another still too. Tanner, can you hear us okay?
I can now. Yeah, I think I'm all back.
Great. Sounds good. And then just for fun, why don't we go to a still of the Pacific here project that Stephen worked on, just to show just, oh, gotcha. Just this shows just how different color can be. I mean, very different feels, right? Just from the color, if you knew nothing else about those projects. Okay, let's move on to Aaron Kroger. Hello, Aaron. How are you doing?
Hello, everybody.
He is Director of Product Strategy at Panavision. Working at the nexus of production and post, Aaron Kroger relates to creatives and engineers alike. In 2010, he joined post facility Light Iron, where he was instrumental in designing the Outpost mobile post labs, training camera crews how to use them on set, and teaching classes on best practices in file-based cinematography. After Light Iron was acquired by Panavision, Aaron joined the team that created the Millennium DXL and DXL2 camera systems and played a key role in the development of their color characteristics. All right, next up we have Samuel. Samuel, can you do me a favor? Can you pronounce your last name so I don't fail miserably here?
It's Bilodeau.
Bilodeau. Okay, I would have been close. He is an HDR consultant and colorist. Samuel is an independent filmmaker, HDR colorist, and expert in video technologies, formerly the lead colorist at Mystery Box. He has co-authored and presented content on behalf of companies like Dolby, Panasonic, AGA Video Systems, the Ultra HD Forum, and NASA TV. which has helped hundreds of creators get started with HDR and creatively manage their HDR looks from set through to post-production. For more on his upcoming class, you can go to www.masterhdrvideo.com. That's masterhdrvideo.com. All right, everybody. So I think a good place to dive in, Aaron, do you think you can help us just with the current stage of HDR? Where are we, just the full landscape? What is HDR specifically? Are we monitoring on set? Are people watching it at home? Just kind of give us a lay of the land, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the interesting things, which I think is actually kind of the first in our industry, is that actually the professional on-set side is actually behind the consumer side. So in the past, if you wanted the best looking image, you go to a professional, right? And you expect that a professional monitor would be better than a consumer monitor. But really, with HDR, we've actually had this consumer technology surpass the professional market, and we have been in the professional market have really been playing catch up. And fortunately for everyone here, we are now caught up and catching up and starting to even surpass. But really, again, so HDR is this idea of being able to, it's high dynamic range, obviously, so it's monitoring anything more than 10 stops of dynamic range. SDR goes up to 10 stops of dynamic range, and then when we start anything beyond that, we're talking about HDR. And I think we've gotten to the point where we've learned that HDR isn't the old photography, take two photos and blend them. Um, and especially in this conversation, and really when we talk about HDR, we are really talking about the display and the file delivery. We're not talking about the capture, because most cameras now, anything that's shooting a logarithmic capture, log encoding, is probably capturing more than 10 stops of dynamic range, and therefore you could look at that on an HDR monitor. So I think one of the things I'm excited to talk about today with everyone here is just, again, what is that HDR monitor? And like you said, we're not actually, in the professional side, we're not really looking at HDR that often. Just up until very recently, the monitor selection was quite limited. And I would still say the default, from the Panavision side, the default monitor that ships on orders is not HDR. We're quite far from that becoming, a standard, or becoming in this normal packages. But as our consumers are looking at this, I think it's, really important that we get to that point. And actually, we were talking earlier, and if you go to Best Buy, you go to a TV store, and it would actually be very hard to buy a TV that's not HDR. So I think actually on the consumer side, there's plenty of people, there's a ton of people that have monitors. If you bought a TV in the last couple of years, it's probably HDR. You may not even know that. Or my favorite thing is, obviously, my parents bought a TV, and of course it was an HDR TV. My mom has no idea that it's an HDR TV, but that's also the beauty of HDR. For the consumer, is it's essentially automatic. So that's, again, just another great advantage of HDR.
That's Thank you, Aaron, for kind of setting the stage for us there. So you mentioned that HDR monitors aren't going out necessarily in Panavision rental packages as much as maybe they should be and can be one day once the technology catches up a little bit. So which brings us to Samuel. You have an OLED 22 monitor behind you that indeed would be great to rent from Panavision one day for on-set HDR monitoring. But what do you think most people get wrong, Samuel, when they think about color, just handling on set, color workflow in general, and then sort of into HDR? So why don't you help us set things up from that perspective?
So I think for a lot of us, especially like my generation of filmmakers, grew up in the digital age, right at the transition from film to digital, and we've gotten to trust our monitors to, in kind of a what you see is what you get form. And with HDR, we're kind of stepping back away from that. Is the monitors that we have on set, if you're shooting for HDR, haven't been showing us what the camera's seeing. We have log, and it's been capturing these great dynamic ranges, but the monitors have been limited to SDR. we do our live grades and those look great, but we're clipping our highlights or we're crushing blacks where we're actually going to be able to retain that detail later when we deliver that to the consumers. And so a monitor like the Small HD OLED 22 is one of the steps towards being able to see that on set. When you bring HDR into set, into your production environment, you're able to really start seeing the nuances of the shadows and the nuances of the highlights in a way that you haven't really been able to see before. It changes how you think and feel as a cinematographer, how you think and feel and lay out the brightness values in your scene. So having access to a tool like the Small HD OLED 22, where not only is it a great high bright monitor that I can send an HDR signal to, but it's color accurate. So I can see the right colors on it, right? That I'm sending to, or that I'll eventually send to my viewers, right? Or I can have a live grade in HDR on set for that, or on that display, right? That's all going to give me, as a cinematographer, as a creative, a much better feel for the content that I'm creating, much better way of capturing the look and the dynamic and the dynamism between light and shadow and different colors than I ever have had access before, right? And you don't have to have the HDR on set. You can definitely shoot very high quality, gorgeous cinematic content without having that on set. But these new monitors are going to bring that back to more of a what we see is what we get, and we can plan those looks on set.
Well, so Samuel, I mean, you bring up an interesting point there, right? So you don't need to have it, maybe. I mean, Tanner, I know you've delivered a lot of shows where you weren't monitoring HDR necessarily, they weren't monitoring on set. But from my perspective as a director of photography, I'm the keeper of the image, and I use squishy words around monitors like trust. I want to trust that what I'm seeing is what I'm actually getting. And it almost doesn't matter what the specs are. One of the reasons I like staying in the small HD ecosystem personally is because I sort of know what I'm getting from different type of monitor to different type of monitor. Because when you're in the middle of a fast-paced shoot day, you don't like changing, at least I don't like changing variables constantly. I like understanding what I'm getting. So Tanner, you mentioned that you've delivered 5 shows in HDR that weren't monitored on set in HDR, which kind of gives me heart palpitations because, again, as the keeper of the image, I want to know what it is that I'm going to be. I mean, look, people might be watching it on a tiny little device like this at the end of the day, but I want to have autonomy over that image for as long as possible. So, Tanner, can you go into that a little bit, just that distinction? I mean, I'm sure those shows ended up looking great, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it really, a large part of it just comes from, we're still, like we were saying, we're still kind of catching up production wise and post wise to being able to have a full HDR workflow. Right now, it's a little cumbersome for them to be viewing, or it's getting easier now, but it was, this was 2 years ago and last year, it was a lot harder for them to be viewing HDR on set and be cutting with it and going all the way through. So and more expensive. So they just said, we'll stay SDR the entire time, like all of our other shows. And then in final, we'll just go to HDR. And now how, like kind of going back to a DP, knowing what his image is and trusting the monitor, what we usually did was during the camera test, we'd have the DP shoot his camera test. And so he's shooting a stop over or stop under, he's shooting all his variables. And now he can come into my bay and see what those variables are doing. And so the trust, kind of like what you're saying, the trust is like film a little bit. Now he's doing his legwork to understand, what does this camera shoot at? Where can I stay safely? And what will this do to the final image? Even though he might not be monitoring it on set, the idea being that, like, let's say you're really wanting to keep all the spectral highlights. Well, on set, you want to see that in your raw image, and you want to see that even in your SDR image. You want to see that those highlights aren't being clipped. As a result, you know that when it gets to HDR, the highlights aren't clipped. So even though you're not seeing the final product, I think there's ways that you can use clues to tell you on set, oh, I'm safe. I know I'm capturing a value that can be fully brought out or manipulated in final color.
And I think about it in a similar way in terms of clues, right? I use a variety of different tools, waveforms, histograms, zebras, et cetera, to kind of get a sense, plus monitor. It's not using one thing. You also alluded to something really important too, called prep. Not everyone has the luxury of working with a DIT to in prep to kind of dial that in, and I acknowledge that some people do, and that's fantastic. But there's nothing stopping you yourself from filming a clip and just playing around. Most software now has some type of HDR manipulation capabilities. Switching gears from HDR for just a second, I know we're going to stay on that for a while, but Stephen, I want to talk about the role that color has in the storytelling process. I started off saying, it's one of the tools of the cinematographer, of a filmmaker in general, to tell the story. Obviously, I mean, the Pacific, for example, has a very distinct color palette to it. How do you approach a project? Are you often probably brought in the post process? I wish the whole post team could be brought in earlier. But how do you kind of jump into a project? It can be the Pacific, it can be something else, but from a creative perspective, not technical for this one.
Wow, that's a good question. For me, it comes down to what just collaborating with the client, trying to understand what they're going for. Reading or looking at the show, for example, trying to decide what color palette might be best to tell that story. For period pieces like the Pacific and whatnot, those kind of tell themselves. You want to portray something that isn't really pretty, and your color palette is somewhat limited at that point. Trying to keep the colors muted or not as prominent or poppy, whatnot. But color evokes emotion, so it's definitely a tool that can be used to tell a story in a way that sound can't. I like to roll through a show and get an idea of what the scene is that I'm looking for, and try to decipher it, so to speak, without any audio. And then I try to say, okay, what am I trying to highlight per se? Is it a dialogue scene? Is it an emotional scene from the standpoint of background stuff, whatever? And color can certainly play a big role with that. The warm and fuzzy tones can evoke a happiness, and then you can desaturate and bring other values in and change color tones, remap them, and it can be something a little more, dire, a little more dark, so to speak. But essentially, I just like to get with a client, establish what they want, what they're looking for, and then try to add something to that, if that makes sense.
Well, it makes a ton of sense. Talk to me about the client communication side of that. What kind of notes do you like to hear? It's hard to give color notes. Do you like people bringing in comparable titles? I would like it to feel like this moment from this movie in this spot, or do you hate that? Do you like speaking in emotion? I want this scene to feel, sad,
A little
happy,
bit of
gritty.
both. It's a little bit of both, and a lot of that comes with collaboration with not only the director, but with the DP as well. Maybe putting vignettes on to bring things down that he might not have been able to do on set, and just highlight certain characters better. Bring them out a little bit more here or there. But a lot of that, like I said, is communication between myself and the DP as to what he's looking for, and he's going to let me know what he wants down versus what he's looking for up, or a specific color tone that he may want. And the best part of what color is that I can say, here's what you asked for, but take a look at this and tell me if you don't think this might tell the story better. And a lot of times that collaboration is what is really fun with color. Just being able to add something to it, that he might not have felt. For example, magenta is a pretty ugly color, but when you go into a flashback sequence, it can be quite fun to use something like that and explore other colors that, aren't there. And a lot of that really follows having that openness with that relationship with the DP and with your producers to allow you to explore and go into those different areas, that aren't looked at that often. Most people, have a specific idea of what they want in mind when they walk into my room. And some of them won't allow that to be, they won't allow that to be a different direction, so to speak. So it's, as you said, it's those key phrases of trying to give what the DP is looking for, and put that in before the producers see it, so that you can kind of give them that idea of what it is we're going for. And then from there, it's just what they like and don't like.
And do you kind of set a series of rules, so to speak, for an individual season, right? You say, okay, this is what this season of television is, and you kind of try to stick to maybe a couple bullet points along the way. Is that?
Very much so, depending upon the
Mhm.
show. For example, I work on a show called Outlander, and it is like a time travel show. So, they may come in with a notion of this is what we want it to look like. And I'm like, no, we got to separate that from the reality, or from the 1700s, have to look radically different from 1970, so to speak. And it's that collaboration that I feel is what's really important in color. They really don't have a great understanding of what color, what the broad spectrum of color can represent. They're used to looking at
Sure.
a dailies light that they're used to, they've been seeing forever, and it can be somewhat difficult to convince them to go away from that. But if you're able to present that scene and that color correction in a way that it makes the story be told better, they almost always gravitate towards that.
Sometimes it takes a little convincing, though. Yeah.
It does, very much so, because as you said, they're so used to seeing like a daily's light, and that dates all the way back to when I started in the 90s. I would be told, oh, that doesn't look like my Avid output. Well, it doesn't need to look like the Avid output, but a lot of producers get hung up on that to where that's all they're used to seeing, so that when you present something sort of darker or a different value, they really have to stop and think about that. And unless it really is done well to where it can tell that story and not take them out of their story, it works well.
There's something about color that just lends itself to, I don't know, the whims of whatever. There's trends that develop. There's all sorts of things. I know I watched a specific season of television. I'm like, dark is beautiful.
It
Everything,
seems to
everything.
nature. Yeah. For example, just 15 years ago, green was considered an ugly color. And if you were
Hmm.
doing any advertisement, any commercial work or anything, you didn't want green in your imagery. It just portrayed something different than what American, ad agencies thought.
Yep.
And then we sort of developed where green was a good thing, where the seafoam came in, and then everybody gravitated towards the blues and the greens and all that. And
And
it
feeling
really changed
orange
a
and
lot. It became more of a European kind of a feel, for lack of a better way to describe that. I feel like the European color palette is far different than the American color palette is. And I think that, grading wise, we're very open to anything in that regard. But from a client standpoint, that Americanized look was the only one that everybody sort of wanted. And now that has gone full circle to where darkness is accepted. The green palettes and the blues are really liked. A lot of shows are even painting themselves in those colors now that you didn't see, 10, 20 years ago at all. Everybody shied away from it. And I think that that's another world that HDR has also opened up, is that the whole color palette is so much greater that it allows your eyes to be opened up and to see things in a much different way.
now I can feel Tanner and Samuel wanting to hop in here. Tanner, why don't we go to you? Then we'll go to you next, Samuel. So Tanner, your thoughts on tropes, styles, bigger color palettes.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, definitely. With HDR, it truly as a colorist is pretty amazing place to be, because we're making images and we're doing color that have never been seen before. I mean, it truly was a limit of technology to be able to recreate these things. So, as far as like let's go to like tropes of different color places. Mexico being yellow. Well, obviously, a lot of times that was used in a storytelling context of maybe a jail cell or something in Mexico, and they wanted to feel hot and nasty. But now with like HDR and stuff, and that was just like what's a hot nasty look? Oh, yellows and greens. That's kind of But now I feel like with HDR, a cool thing is we're able to explore more things. Like I was talking about earlier about a heaven scene, where I was like, okay, guy died and went to heaven. Well, you got the classic fog in the atmosphere. But with HDR now, I can make that fog be extremely bright. I want to feel like you're staring into a headlight a little bit, and it's uncomfortable being in this white purgatory. And that's like an example of a trope could be of heaven being this one thing, but now HDR has allowed me to go and explore different looks and different fills, and not maybe feel like I'm tied to a certain look. Make it look uncomfortable. Okay, put yellow green into the image. Maybe make it bright to be uncomfortable, or dark to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, play against those tropes whenever you can. Samuel, we'll go to you now, but I would say to the audience, just be careful when you feel yourself going into those tropes. Try to play against that. Tanner mentioned words like dark and nasty. Maybe some countries don't like to be portrayed specifically that way, or play against what the common color palette is for some place. It became common, quote, because of maybe some laziness, to be honest. So try to play against those tropes. Samuel, you have a take on this, and then we'll go to you, Aaron.
Yeah. Yeah. So just again, to reiterate what Steven and Tanner said, HDR has really opened up the box, and like SDR had a much more limited color palette. So what you could do was a lot less. And as a result of that, our colors and our perception of these images are linked to our emotional memories. And so we literally feel certain things with certain looks on our images. And so we've done so much with SDR for so long that we have the tropes have come out of a lot of these color shorthands that we're referencing. And what HDR has done is it's opened up that box. It's allowed us to explore new ways of linking to our color memory, right? To trigger those emotions and those feelings within us, right? It used to be if we wanted to make something warm, we had to get rid of our ability to have extended colors within the oranges and reds, right? Because we're contracting that side of the palette if we're shifting our white balance. With HDR, we contract it a little bit, but we still have a full palette of colors that we can do. So we can shift the white balance like we've gone inside to tungsten light, or we've gone outside, we can shift things bluer like it's a cloudy day, or we can shift things brighter like it's a bright out exterior, or darker like we're a dim interior. And these are things that HDR has allowed us to do to connect more with our natural emotional connection with the world. And in terms of eliminating that shorthand, that gives us the ability to walk away from these tropes, because we can move more towards the realism and pull from people's natural experiences of the world around them to build that emotional story through our color and through our looks.
That's a great point, Aaron. So I know you worked on the DXL system at Panavision. I think known for its color, to be honest. But I want to understand from the camera perspective, what are some of the things you think about when you're working on color characteristics for a camera? And then maybe we can go into just being a DP in the field. How are you setting up your colors to have the most gradable possible image? So maybe tackle that for me, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, obviously, I think as all cinematographers know, when kind of starting out with the camera, dynamic range, capture dynamic range, is so important. And really, generally, when comparing cameras, especially more so in the past, was like that was basically the first top tier thing you check is what is the dynamic range of this camera, and is that going to suit my vision? Is that going to, you know, allow for my mistakes? Is that going to, cover me for these different scenarios? Um, so obviously when you know starting and developing the camera, obviously just the sensor technology is number one. And then it's really important also then to look at the color processing pipe, and looking at the different type of, we talked about log encoding. So again, if you're capturing more than 10 stops of dynamic range, you're not going to be able to store that in an SDR file. So now, obviously, we're capturing raw on the DXL as well. But even as we're monitoring it, again, this log encoding comes in, and we had kind of the industry standard for many years, the Cineon log curve, which was based off of film. But actually, that we had to depart away from that, because that log curve actually could only hold like about 14 stops of dynamic range. And with the DXL2 utilizing the Monstro sensor, we're now able to capture 16 plus stops of dynamic range. And so moving into, a new log base is really important. And then again, then developing the transforms to go from this color space, from your capture from your camera onto your monitor. And so one of the things that's interesting, and whether it's HDR or SDR, again, we have this large container, we have this, 14, 16 stop in a large color space. And, now we need to look at a subset of that on a monitor. And I think it's really important with, especially with cinema cameras, is to not just mathematically do that. And I think we've seen cameras out there where, um, and color profiles where, again, okay, it's mathematically perfect, but we are anyone in the film industry, it's art, right? We're artists all in our own right. And mathematically perfect is not necessarily the visual thing or going to evoke the emotion that you want. So um, so again, that was one of the big things with the DXL was, even just as simple from the on-set side was getting that monitor transform, to look more cinematic, to look more appealing as opposed to just perfect. And I think one thing, based off of what Steven and Tanner were saying, I think one of the things that we all fall into as creatives, especially as cinematographers, is that fact that people are falling in love with the look that they're seeing on set and then in
Yeah.
dailies. And we call it, I like to call it dailies-itis. And again, I know, like Steven was saying, you end up you try to push the client, and they're like, no, I want it this way. And I think that's why monitoring HDR on set is so important, because if you're only looking at 100 nits through daily on set through daily, and now you get into the bay with your colorists, and like Tanner was saying, now you pump those clouds up 3-4 times brighter. They're like, well, that's not what I've been looking at for the last 6 months, so I don't like that. And it's like, no, but that's actually better for the story. That's actually a better image, but just in their mind, it's so burnt in, of this smaller subset.
Aaron, I'm going to go to you next, Samuel, about Daly's itis, which is perfect, honestly, because there was a time, right, where people were just broadcasting log commercials. They're like, the client likes the log. That's just what the commercials look like. But before I go to you, Samuel, Aaron, can you help me clear something up? So I hear this in very, I don't know, geeky circles. But when you get to a certain price point on camera, right? They all have similar dynamic range. They all have full frame, what have you. Can you match most cinema cameras to one another without, I'm not saying play favorites, but do you know what I'm saying? Like the way camera technology is now, without, this is a little bit of a minefield, so tread carefully. But what do you
Yes,
think
yes.
about that?
No, I mean, I really do think, I think with, like any of if you have a professional colorist, and if the colorist is doing their job right, you should not have any idea what camera is what.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because one of the things, again, every one of these, any professional or even semi-professional, probably even consumer these days, camera is capturing, 12, 14 stops, 16 stops of dynamic range. So if we're looking at 1,000 nit, HDR monitor, we're going to be looking at roughly 13 and a half stops of dynamic range. So if your camera can capture more than that, or at least that, all cameras in theory, will look very similar. And obviously there's some noise differences
Sure.
depending on the ISO. But I really do think that, today camera choice is more about, just functionality, workflow, and it's not as much about image, because we've just our capture quality is still far exceeding display technology, even HDR, which we're saying is so much bigger than SDR. Well, our cameras are capturing way more than even that.
Yeah.
100%. So Samuel, before we go to you, audience, if you're listening, maybe spend less time arguing. I'm talking to fanboys, fangirls out there about which are the best cameras. Stop that argument, please. Samuel, what's your take on Daly's itis and all cameras can be made to look similar?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have a DIT on set who understands how the camera is capturing and understands how the displays are rendering that image, you're going to be able to get and develop a really good look on set. But if you don't, you're at the mercy of how that display and how the display that the cinematographer is using or that you've set up in Video Village, how those displays are rendering that image. And that rendering is part of the look that they're seeing. And I've had clients where they said, well, this isn't what I saw on set. And I didn't know what they were seeing on set. I couldn't see it because I wasn't there. They had a display that had some weird settings on it. And I was just at a loss for they couldn't describe what they were seeing. And I was at a loss to try and give them what they wanted, right? Because they didn't take that into account and they hadn't thought about that. We get these emotional connections to the images and to the looks that we've developed. Especially what we've been seeing on set is often an emotional time for a lot of people. You're realizing your vision, you're realizing the feel that you want to get, and you develop an emotional connection to what you're seeing there. So being able to monitor that on set, having a DIT who can set up your proper Video Village section with accurate colors, with accurate looks for what the camera's actually capturing, and actual live grades to bring it into the right realm. If you get that live grading done on set or in the dailies review done at a high enough level, you're going to be able to bring that look that the DP wanted, that your cinematography, that your producers want, that they've been seeing, all the way back into coloring or into your color suites, and you'll be able to start there, right? Because you've taken the way the display is modifying things out of the equation. Right. And so you're able to basically bring that image, and then on my master monitor or on my client view monitor, it's going to look what they saw on set. Right. We're going to have brought all that information into post. And so we can start there and then do little tweaks with some power windows or maybe some color tweaks that, they couldn't see on set or that we didn't have the time to fix on set. Right. We can update it and augment it, but we're already starting with the look and feel that they wanted.
Isn't it weird how tribal and political color can get on sets? I don't know why that I've seen that happen so many times. What you are displaying on your monitor can absolutely really help you or be a big disaster in like a month when you're in post. Keep that in mind. I mean, look, always hire a DIT. I'll be the first one to say that. But if you can't afford to have a DIT on set, at least understand what we're talking about because, oh my gosh, it's a pitfall. Stanley, did you have a follow-up to that? No. All right. I just see you unmuting, and I'm like, all right, he's ready. Stephen, do you have any perspective on dailies-itis or just kind of understanding that perception of what the client saw on set? And this kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier. We don't all have the vocabulary to be like, I want the image to look like this, and this, right? The client doesn't always have that vocabulary. So have you experienced dailies-itis and matching a perception that's hard to achieve?
Almost on every project for that matter. What I like
Speaking
to do
actually, hey, Stephen, can you tilt down just a little bit? Speaking of
Sure.
tropes, you are flying in the face of composition tropes here. So I love that. But okay, yeah, thanks. Just want to see you. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I fight that on a daily basis, essentially. What I like to try to do to nip it in the bud is I'll take a look at the first days of dailies and whatnot, and I will like redo the dailies pass after I've talked to the DP, just taking my own notes and whatnot and making a JPEG or whatnot, just so that I can send to him and maybe the producers and say, here's kind of where we're going to be in the final, so that they don't get that preconceived notion of what that dailies-itis is. And a lot of times it does help because they're like, oh, Steve's going to fix it. We don't need to worry about it. So they don't necessarily get locked into the dailies-itis thing. But yeah, it happens on pretty much every show we work on. It's what Simon Samuel was saying earlier. It's trying to establish that look on set and trying to get as much of that look in the bay and then tweak from there so that they at least see that you're starting from their perspective of what they're used to seeing. And then almost 90% of the time, if I'm adding something to it, it's going to make it better. And they're going to be on board with that. But the earlier you can kind of get that in, you can eliminate that dailies-itis perception, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. In fact, it made Tanner so angry, dailies-itis, that he just killed his internet connection. Are you back with us, Tanner?
And so what I decided to do for this one to try to make sure we don't run into that issue in post is I've made Luts for every look after talking to the DP. per the episode. So instead of having one just Rec 709 generic LUT, I tried to embody their look and give them a LUT. So that way, when they're cutting with it, they're used to, like, one of them's a really heavy blue look. So they're used to seeing the image as heavy blue. And like from a color standpoint, here's like a great example of technically why it's good for them to see a heavy blue. Because heavy blue looks have a version of magenta skin tone. It's just how the color works. But if they watched a warm reference their entire time, and they pop to my color, my big heavy blue look, they'll always say, Tanner, skin tones are magenta. Well, yes, skin tones are magenta compared to my warm to a warm normal look, but in this blue world. And so that's like just a perfect example of how having them see what closer to the final is only going to make the final easier, and them not be surprised of, like, I had no idea this is what final was going to be.
Yeah, I'd even argue it even starts before dailies. It can start in like the agency deck
Oh,
that we're
very much.
turning in. Just pulling Google images of a person smiling on a park bench. Suddenly that's the look for the whole project. Just like, oh, makes me so mad. Samuel, can you talk just maybe using the small HD ecosystem, just because that's one that you and I know really well. How do you feel like monitoring generally should be handled on set? Everything from like an external monitor on the camera all the way to your OLED 22 to what the director's seeing to what the client's seeing. Personally, for me, from a political perspective, I like to have the director and maybe the scriptee kind of alone in their little world, right? And then I put client somewhere else. Can you just kind of run through how a typical set might look for you from the monitoring perspective?
Yeah. Every role on set has a different need for what they see from the image. So the cinematographer, the director, the client, they need to be seeing something that is the best dynamic range, most accurate color, right? The cinematographer we want to be showing them the HDR so that they can check their exposure, they can get the right feel and the look that they're looking for. Your focus puller doesn't need that. Your hair and makeup don't need that. Right? They don't need all of this extra color detail or extra reference that your above the line crew needs. So one of the things that I like to do is I'll use a lot of Sdr monitors if I'm doing an HDR deployment, right? So the cinematographer gets the most accurate HDR monitor because they're the one who really needs to dial in the look. But I'll often use something like a consumer television for either Video Village for the director, scriptee, or producers or client view if they're in the room, right? Something that is close enough. I think Tanner and I were talking earlier about how our OLED televisions are pretty close to a lot of reference monitors in terms of color, right? So setting up something like that, they're going to get a really good experience with the look, right? And the cinematographer can run around and look at his or her master monitor, right, to dial in everything, the look that they want. But then all the other ones, I'm going to be doing an SDR version, right? Something that is high enough contrast that a focus puller can see the critical focus point, that a hair and makeup artist can just glance at and say, hey, there's something wrong with that talent, right? Or an art person can say something that's out of place. Right. And so as I'm doing that, I'm going to build in tools and I'm going to use some small HD small monitors or some of the larger, more color accurate ones, right? My DIT cart's probably going to have my small HD OLED 22, right? It's portable, it's rugged, it's going to give me that great look that I want. I might deploy one of those for a cinematographer as well, right? And doing that and kind of understanding that I'm not just sending one signal out. I'm going to be using things like live grade or LUT boxes or the small HD, the Teradek integrated LUTs that I can just deploy from my DIT station to send out a master signal, right, that then gets mapped to the characteristics of that individual display. And so every display is optimized for the roles of the people who are using it, right? That we can deploy a couple of more expensive displays, right, and spend the money for the roles that need it, but not have to worry about spending that additional capital for every display on set. Your sound guy doesn't need HDR, right? Your cinematographer needs HDR. Right. So that's just basically how I approach that.
Real quick on just audio guy. I saw an audio guy in the last feature I did. He had a iPhone stuck to his wrist. This is actually the boom guy. And he was using the Serve Pro out. Wasn't that cool? Look at that, because that's how they're standing the whole time. I was really impressed by that. anyway, so for me, I have like a 503 on camera. I have a 702 touch that maybe I walk around with, and then I have a Cine 24 behind me, or your OLED monitor behind you, which is a little further
Yeah, and you
back
have
where
a
maybe we.
bolt. Yeah, you might have your bolts connected to things, walking things wireless. Yeah.
Aaron, I rent a lot of stuff from Panavision. From that aside, I try to own monitors as a cinematographer, honestly. You can rent cameras, but I like to own my glass. I like to own my monitors. Glass doesn't depreciate. It's like other pieces of tech. Monitors, again, it comes back to that trust thing. So I like to own my monitors. I like to know, again, Panavision stuff always very well taken care of. I like to know it wasn't used as a football on a car-to-car thing just like a week ago.
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay. So Derek Joe asks specifically for Tanner. Tanner, you said you make LUTs for the DP to use based on the final look. When you create those, are you using test footage that the DP has shot with unfinalized lighting, or are you making that LUT after the first dailies come in? Can you clear that up for Derek?
It's actually a mixture. It could be both, either or. So sometimes first day of set was shot, and they'll give me. In fact, this last one I just did this morning. They shot yesterday. I got the dailies in. Came in this morning with the direction from the DP of what LUT they wanted, or what direction they wanted, and I made a LUT to their footage that was shot. Sometimes it is a camera test, which would also kind of be the same thing. And it would usually, with a camera test, since they're testing out different lightings and stuff, it's probably more like the hair and makeup test that I'm maybe probably setting more a final look on, since that is, more. They'll have a more controlled lighting setup, and they're not just experimenting with what the camera can do. So it depends, either or sometimes, and it is really best to work on the exact same media that was shot. Obviously, to make a LUT for a GoPro won't work for a Sony Venice camera. So you do at the very least want to make sure you're using the exact same camera to make the set LUT.
Yeah, no kidding. Famous example of some dwarves going down a river in The Hobbit. I was like, GoPro shot.
Oh, that's awful.
Oh,
I'll say this as a colorist, I'm pretty sure I can get that GoPro to match just a little better than they did in that scene.
all
That was
right.
a
Well,
harsh cut.
otherwise, huge fan of the franchise. Want to be very clear. Okay. Moving moving along. Aaron, can we talk about file types for a second without getting too into the weeds? So, as a DP, I probably can afford to deliver like Apple ProRes 444. I have the capability of RAW, but sometimes it's like literally a budget thing where we just can't shoot RAW, or we only can for like select VFX things. And me, I'm like, I want to get you the best file you possibly can to the post team. Um, what just break down what types of files work for. They all seem pretty gradable these days.
Every show I do and every show that Steve does is not done in RAW. In fact, I've rarely worked in RAW. ProRes
You can't leave the big
444 in
files
a
around.
12-bit or 16-bit package, or an MXF in 12 or 16-bit. That is that is plenty. I've never had an issue with Keen. Never had an issue with anything.
Yeah, it's a
So
lot. It's a
RAW
lot of
is. I mean,
money
so
too for you.
it's just
Yeah,
saying
Yeah,
that RAW
very much
is
so.
not.
Yeah.
You don't have to use it. We get amazing results without it.
Stephen. Yeah, sorry. Take that away. Ooh, yep. Stephen, do you want to pipe in there?
No,
Oh,
I was just agreeing with what Tanner said. With the amount of work that I'm doing, I couldn't use raw files to begin with just because I couldn't move the things around fast enough to get my jobs done. The log format certainly provides everything that I need and allows me to move a much smaller file and then export the DPX frame that I need for the deliverable.
so just so the audience understands, just because your camera can shoot RAW, be strategic about all of this. It's always just line
Mhm.
items on a budget about what you're
Mhm.
spending your money on, what are your priorities. So just keep this in mind. This is a bunch of professional colorists saying ProRes, often fine. In fact, the majority of them, this is all they've seen on their last few projects. Hey, Aaron, I'm being told that we unfortunately had a little bit of an audio issue. Do you mind summarizing just ProRes versus RAW, just your take on that from the beginning, just kind of wrapping it up
Yeah.
with a nice bow.
Yeah. I mean, like everyone just said, I think in general, if you're shooting, say, a log encoded ProRes, again, that's going to give you everything you want. I think one of the advantages of shooting RAW, although it may be, again, you're going to have to now do that processing. But that allows you, as technology advances, it allows you to go back and re-debayer that footage, reinterpret that footage. And in the case of Red and IPP2, they actually developed a new debayer algorithm that gained a couple stops of dynamic range. So there's been remasters of Red 1 projects that now have more dynamic range than they did when they first came out. So I think it's, as you mentioned, in a perfect world, well, in a perfect world, we would all shoot IMAX film.
Yeah, of course. Yes, everyone here shoots IMAX 100% of the time. Yeah.
But obviously, budget-wise, that's impossible. So I think just like we talked about with camera choice, is I do think that there's a lot of other factors, to weigh in when you're making that decision of raw versus log. But I think the bigger thing is making sure you're in a ProRes, or not a long GOP 8-bit. So moving into a 10-bit plus all iframe file.
Yeah, so much time is spent on, oh, should I buy this camera or this camera? Going back to something, Aaron, you said a long time ago. I mean, most cameras these days have 12 stops of dynamic range, like mirrorless cameras, you know what I mean, that are like $2,000. The Sigma FP I know is 12 stops. So consider all of these things. So if you're already able to deliver an HDR, you can make decisions as a producer, like, okay, we don't need to spend this much money on the camera package, because let's say we get picked up by X organization that requires HDR at the end, you still have that capability to do that. So just understand this whole ecosystem, and then you can make informed decisions. Stephen, I have a question for you. Let's see, where is it? Oh, yeah. What is your relationship? This is Christopher Bonner again. As a post colorist, what is your relationship like with the DIT on set? Oh, that's interesting. How do you collaborate and work together? Are you often brought in at that early stage?
Once again, that depends on studio show that we're working with. A lot of the shows that I'm working with don't have a budget for DITs anymore. So at that point, it's just a straight collaboration with the DP. But if there is a DIT involved, we talk to each other the first day to make sure that he has a good LUT on set that he's using that I can use as well, so that, as we talked about before, when the material comes in, it's sort of seamless as to what they're used to seeing. I do feel that, with budgetary constraints these days, that a lot of productions aren't using DIT simply because they have a trust of, they shoot in log. The guy knows he's not clipping his whites, crushing and clipping his blacks. He's like, Steven's going to do what he can with it, and for that they do get to save a little bit of money. But on the other end, they really rely on dailies then to be their first view, and requires us to be involved a little bit more.
Geez, I mean, COVID protocols aside, try to have DITs on your set. Literally every time I've had a DIT, it's saved me in some way as a cinematographer. So let me encourage you, if you're listening out there, try not to cut that part of your budget. Maybe don't have hand-rolled sushi at Crafty. Save money. Save money there.
And same thing with what you said. You don't necessarily have to go with a bigger camera. Save a little money there and hire a DIT. It's going to make the project a lot better, all the way through to the deliverable.
So yeah, we're gonna wrap things up here really quick, but I just wanted to talk with Tanner again about exposure outside of Windows. So the general vocabulary of film and television right now is, it's okay if you can't see outside of Windows. The issue is with HDR, you have so much information in those windows that you need to now make sure there's a tree out there or something nice, and not just maybe a white frame. I've done that a lot. Not a C-stand. I mean, there's all sorts of tricks that we do for that. Okay, sounds like everybody can hear me here. So does anyone have a specific take on just Windows in general and how those should be handled on set? It's very much just a creative choice. Sorry, I have like 700 iMessages coming in here.
If I could add to that quickly,
yes.
One of the big issues with HDR is if there's a translite involved.
This is another good
with HDR, you see all the way down the block now. So translates and whatnot become very visible. So It's almost better if a DP doesn't really want to see a whole lot out the window unless he really prepares for it, because it's all going to be there.
You
Um,
know, I never want to see outside,
Yep.
honestly, unless it's some sort of storytelling thing. Like who cares about the trees on the hill behind the people? If
exactly.
they're looking at that, then you might have a problem with your story.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, gentlemen. So I'm going to wrap things up here. Everyone, I don't think we got to everyone's questions. Feel free to hit us all up on our various social channels. I think we'll put some tags in the comments so you can follow up with us later, or you can follow up with any of the Wooden Camera, Teradek, Small HD social channels as well with any follow-up questions. But thank you, everyone, so much. I have just a quick outro here. Thanks again to Creative Solutions and Sigma for helping to make this event possible. Please go to cs.inc to sign up for our upcoming webinars, be part of the live audience for Q&A sessions with guests, and enjoy the recordings of our past conversations there as well. And again, apologies for the technical issues here today, but just a friendly reminder, please subscribe to Teradek's YouTube channel. We want to do more of these. And thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. You as well.